Importantly, it's very easy in R to access the help pages, the documentation that explains how to use various functions. If you know the name of the function that you're interested in reading more about, you can type !matrix. If I run this code, the help page for the matrix function appears. And you can see here under the description part of the help page that this is a help page not only for the function matrix, but also for the functions we just learned, as.matrix and is.matrix. Using the help pages and documentations for R functions is not something you do just when you're beginning. Rather, I access the help pages for the functions I'm using every single time that I use R. Obviously, as you get to be more familiar with certain functions, you start to memorize certain aspects of them, and you may not need to look at the help page all the time, but there's really no reason to memorize what the inputs and outputs are for any particular function when it's very easy to look them up as needed. So one thing that you should become familiar with as you're learning to use R is the format of a help page. You should learn how to read these help pages, and the best way to learn is just by experience. So whenever you're looking at a new R function, you might try just looking up its help page, but by typing name of the function and seeing what's there. So under description, it tells us what functions are described on this page and what those functions do. The usage part of the help page tells us, again, the name of the function and then a list of the possible inputs, which are called arguments. So a function, again, is something that just takes inputs and then has outputs. The inputs are called arguments, and here I can see the names of the inputs are data, nrow, ncall, byrow, dim names. Those are the possible inputs to the function matrix. In this line here in usage, R is also telling me what the defaults are for each of those values. So for example, if I were to leave out the ncall argument when using the function matrix, the default is that the number of columns is equal to 1. If I leave out the names of the dimensions, the names of the rows and columns, the default is that there are no names for the rows or columns, just a null. If I were to omit the data argument from the matrix, R would just fill in NA values. So this is where I can see not only what the inputs are to a function, but also what the default values are. If I'd like to read more about any of these inputs, any of these arguments, I can go down to this arguments section, and it describes in detail what R is expecting you'll specify for each of the arguments. And again, you can omit any of the arguments that has a default, and here we're learning what the default is. The details section of the help page gives us more information on any aspect of the function that may not have been described so far. For functions that are more complex than matrix, there'll also be a section called value after the section called details that will give you more information on the output of the function. In this case, the output is just a matrix. There's nothing else, so they do not give details on that. There's a note here on how to convert a vector to a matrix. You have references. It says see also. There'll often be a list of other related functions here, which is a good way to learn about new functions in R. And importantly, there's this examples section at the bottom, which is really helpful because if I were to copy paste this code and then run it, I would have some examples of R code using this particular function. So often when I'm trying to figure out how to use a new function in R, I go straight to the examples first, run it, then I can understand what the function seems to be doing and what the inputs and outputs seem to be like. That's also useful for helping figure out whether a particular function is going to accomplish the task you're hoping it will accomplish.